Hi, Angela.
Hello.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. Thank you for having me to your house. It's been a fun weekend.
My pleasure.
All right. I wanted to ask you some questions about the culture of our two countries, Ukraine and the U.S. And there are 6 different categories that we talked about already. The first one, individualism versus collectivism. So is Ukraine more of a we society or I society? And how does this collective individualistic differential affect business and the policies?
Ukraine is definitely we, a collective society. People do lots of things in community. We have even a saying that it's better to beat your uncle by a group of people. But I mean, it just says that you have an enemy attacking you. You need to, grab your neighbors and actually collectively to defend the land. So this has been through centuries a part of Ukrainian culture. People may be doing something, on their own, raising kids, raising cattle, cooking. But then if there is a threat or if there is something where you need a collective force, Ukrainians very quickly get together. Ukrainians are very known by the symbol of solidarity. Solidarity and unity, especially at the time of threat, is one of the strongest features of Ukraine, and which you can, of course, observe now. Everybody
News.
in the wake of some threat to Ukrainian independence or Ukrainian freedoms, people raise up and all together support each other. And actually, people forget completely about their own needs. Whatever needs to be given, to defend the land, to support the neighbor, people forget about their own needs, but they really sacrifice themselves for somebody else.
Yeah, that's true. And relationship with your neighbors, like you're talking about, and co-workers, they're crucial to obtaining information, getting introduced, maybe finding a job or getting a meeting with someone. Do you have any example of that in your own experience?
Neighbors, or you mean colleagues?
Or colleagues, even colleagues. Someone helps you in your...
No, it's traditional. We are not individualists, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody needs help, so you often go and ask our colleagues for help, or you ask for support. In fact, many of my colleagues who no longer works with me or in the World Bank, right? Mm-hmm. We keep relationship and we keep asking each other for some help or support, or you know this, or you know this, can you help me? So we stay in touch, and we traditionally support each other. So it's really a culture of networking through friends and neighbors and colleagues, and staying in touch for long years.
On a higher level than U.S. business colleagues, do you think?
It's difficult because I have not had experience working in many U.S. environments or institutions, and the one where I work, it's more international, so it's not really U.S. Typical U.S. right? So it's hard to say. I cannot really compare the culture, but definitely I can feel that people are a little bit more self-centric, right? Focused on their own needs and their careers. So there is not that much collective sharing or collective support.
Yeah. Ukraine ranks higher on the collective side than the U.S. When the people were interviewed. So how do you see the difference, maybe in like a real life situation, in your experience?
Well, again, in my country, if you have a problem, you go to friends, family, and neighbors. In this country, if you have a problem, you go to psychiatrists, right? You don't even go to your family or your friends, right? So that's it.
Oh, that's a good point. We self medicate or self rely on ourselves. Yeah.
You self rely, but I also find that this is not really deep rooted way of helping yourself, because if you do not feel the support of your family and friends, and there could be a situation where you do need small advice or big advice, or just to talk to someone, right? If your only line of support and backup is your psychiatrist or psychologist, and this is done for fee, so you feel vulnerable all the time. And for minor things, people get reserved. They never reveal that they have some problems, and they cannot really call their friends sometimes to really share and get some just consolation, a basic consolation, right? It creates much more inner stress. And again, there is not always a situation where you can go to psychiatrist, right?
Right.
But you do need to have friends or family or somebody with whom you can come and just cry. Again, we have a saying in Ukrainian is like, you need to have a shoulder to cry on, right? So, I mean, just having somebody, with a big shoulder where you can lay a head, cry, and get consolation and get hugs, right? This type of family or friend support is much more valuable than what you get from psychologist or psychiatrist or a pill, right?
Yeah.
So that's why in Ukraine, again, I guess, people really traditionally do not go to third power, such as psychiatrists or psychologists for support, because people always have family and friends.
Yeah. That's their collective, that's their
Yeah.
support. All right, one other aspect is power distance, where the less powerful members of the society, they expect and they accept that power is given to others above them, that it's not equal. So in Ukraine's case, it says this is accepted. We accept in our society that we have a boss and we shouldn't question that authority, and they don't necessarily ask us if we agree with managerial decisions. They might ask us, but we understand that the power is hierarchical.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think about Ukrainian hierarchical power?
Historically, Ukrainian, all countries with rule of law are hierarchical, right? Because you have to respect the rules in hierarchy. Still, after the breakup Soviet Union, right, and there is more entrepreneurship and people feel that there are more freedoms, it's not that rigid anymore. Moreover, lots of people are fairly brave and courageous, and they can actually go and talk to their boss and say we agree or disagree. So I think Ukraine every year becomes much more democratic and less hierarchical. But you still, again, for us, it's a work ethics to respect the rules and respect your boss, right? It's not that you can open the door with your foot and just like, hey, come on, who are you here to tell us, right? We have ethics and we have the certain, cultural and moral behaviors where we feel we cannot violate. But we are not humble, right? If there's certain things are wrong, Ukrainians would always stand up and go and talk, right? Whether it's done in a professional manner just to the boss or to HR, where complaints can be communicated, or people go to the streets and just protest. Right?
Protests and revolutions
So,
are common. Tell me again about what you told me today, that your colleagues said, why are you talking like that? Angela, you're 100% Ukrainian, and you would question authority. And they said, shut up, you're going to get in trouble.
No, it's very much depends, but women in particular in Ukraine, they've learned to take responsibility through years, right, through generations. And I think that we do see lots of women may not be in the top managerial positions, but they can be still kind of middle level or even lower level management, but they still feel empowered to talk. So, and of course in my institution, when we have some meetings, we are allowed to talk, and of course the bravest ones can talk even unpleasant things, but it's a common culture that women speak up in many institutions. So, and of course among women there are those women who speak the most, right? I'm not aggressive, but I say I like justice, and therefore I always felt necessary, and I felt empowered to speak up.
Yes. And also the idea that the haves and the have-nots, and there are status symbols. And you were telling me that doesn't matter as much as it used to, like driving a Mercedes. It's that you're the boss, you have the big car.
Yeah. I mean, and right after the breakup of the Soviet Union, where access to luxury was something of extreme importance because it was unique. I mean, you could not afford luxury. You could not really, in the Soviet Union, even buy any car, right? So for many people, some symbols meant a lot. I remember that we even have jokes now, but in the early 90s, rich men, they had to show them they had to demonstrate their status by actually wearing burgundy jackets. We are now joking a lot because even Putin, if you look, when he worked for Sobchak, it was 1992, he was actually carrying a suitcase for Sobchak because he was a carry man at that time before he grew in power in St. Petersburg mayor, and then at Yeltsin mayorship or Yeltsin office. He was actually just a carry man, very low profile guy. But he wore a burgundy jacket. Just look.
Yeah.
So burgundy jacket actually meant a person of power or person of money.
Oh, I see.
And it was funny because, and I guess it's just because before Soviet Union broke up, there were really no, costumes or suits other than like black or maybe gray, right? And when the Soviet Union broke up, rich men, they wanted to have some luxury, right? So for some reason, somebody decided that burgundy jacket, like in casino,
It's the power suit.
is a
We
power
had the
suit.
power
So
tie
lots of
in the 80s.
rich men started to wear burgundy jackets.
Yeah.
And of course, still some of rich men, they could ride a Mercedes or have big yachts and so on, right? But I find that with every year, and Ukraine will now be 31 years old, right? Since its new independence in 1991, it's become less important because people start paying attention much more to quality of life rather than specific symbols. And in fact, many of those symbols, which I mentioned, like red or burgundy jacket, even became a joke, right? There is so many memes and jokes about it that nobody will try even to wear it any longer because this would have lots of negative connotations, right? So, and the same with Mercedes. I mean, if you see big Mercedes, and sometimes like it's a 30-year-old Mercedes, and we would joke a lot that like old man would
With the
normally,
ego.
to show his prestige and ego, he would ride such a Mercedes. Of course, younger men will have Porsche or Maserati, come on. Right? But it's no longer as important.
And you told me about upward mobility that you can see now in Ukraine recently. You don't have to be born, a lot of people that were born average and that went to average schools. Your current president, for example, he moved up from not a wealthy status.
No, we never had
never had.
such a thing as being wealthy to become president. It's not in our country. No.
Okay.
In our country, in the past, the political path would normally be from, already being either part of the family of politicians, and therefore they had, the way to manipulate, mentality of people, or this would be people who are just close to rich people and they just will pay for political campaign. So it was either just a matter of money or a matter of culture, political culture. But anybody who either has friends and family or support from rich people, same as here pretty much, right? But money of a candidate itself never really mattered if you have supporters who have money, right? So
Average person can become president.
Average
or president
person
of a
can.
company.
Well, average person can. The issue is that a population still needs to form a culture to better understand what we are voting for, because Ukraine, of course, is a country which definitely has fully democratic elections, and I think it's really what we fought for back in 2004 during Orange Revolution. We wanted to have free election, right? But apart of knowing how to vote, we also need to learn whom to vote for, because there is lots of populism, right? And we all have learned that during the political campaign, a candidate can collect lots of money and pay and tell lies from TV and from advertisement, right? It's everywhere in the world, right? But just Ukrainian electorate sometimes is still very naive, and therefore they can vote for anyone, right? Just listening and liking the words, but without fact-checking. What you need to do, you always need to do fact-checking, right? And apply your wisdom to make sure that you don't vote for a false story. But yes, we have
the
examples.
power difference.
Look whom we had. We had the first president who was partocrat from Soviet Union. The second president was Red Director from old Soviet state company. The third president was very pro-nationalistic governor of central bank, and was
Yushchenko.
probably really the first a real president of independent Ukraine. Then the fourth one was Yanukovych, a criminal, right, who had to run from the country. The fifth one was also old partocrat who had political connections and who was relatively weak, and he was both strong and weak at the same time. And the sixth one is comedian. So Ukraine had all sorts of experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the next one should be a real good, we already had all sorts. So I guess next one will be even better than this one.
I can't wait to see.
Yes.
Well, that's a good lead into the next subject. We talked about uncertainty avoidance. In Ukraine, do people generally try to control the future or just let it happen?
Depends on people, but I think Ukrainians do prefer certainty for sure. I mean, and especially women, because women pretty much take responsibility for the household and in business and so on. So I think women try to manage and influence the future. It's very difficult to live with uncertainty, and of course now with the war creating so much uncertainty where people do not know. I think right after the war people will try to shape up their plans to be definitely at least more comfortable and confident what will happen to their life in the next at least 5 to 10 years. But I think life teaches us to be a little bit more confident and willing to plan your future to have more certainty as an outcome.
Right, and we can see in the revolutions that they wanted to control their own fate and their own government, and people came out in hundreds, thousands.
Yeah.
So
I mean, life has taught Ukrainians historically through centuries that you have to fight for your freedom, you have to defend your rights. If you disagree with something, you have to really, not be silent, right? So Ukrainians always historically also protested even over the past 100 years. And this was one of the reasons Ukrainian nation suffered the most during the Soviet Union. Because the Great Famine of 1932-33 was organized specifically to suppress the protests which were growing on the territory of Ukraine. And Stalin basically just grew very tired of the protest. And Ukraine was the central piece of Soviet Union, was actually holding Soviet Union together because it was a central piece. And he realized that if he has protests ongoing on the territory of Ukraine, he will lose. The Soviet Union will fall apart, because that was actually what Ukrainians wanted. They wanted to get out of the Soviet Union, and that's why they started protests. It was difficult to get Ukrainians in the Soviet Union in the first case. So it took Soviets 3 years, from 2021 to 2024, to actually agree on the terms for creating Soviet Union for Ukraine to be part of it. So 3 years of negotiations where Ukraine finally agreed, and they signed the treaty where Ukraine became part of Soviet Union. And then, of course, right after that, when the Soviets started to suppress Ukrainian language, Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian nationalistic, pride, that's where protests started. And then we had the first famine in 1927 and protests, peasants' protests, and then, of course, in 31, 32, 33, that's where the largest scale famine developed. And again, it was all artificial, and it was genocide against Ukrainians. And again, the reason is because Ukrainians always stood up. They would never ever tolerate any form of oppression.
Yeah. So not only they don't accept the uncertainty, like they don't like uncertainty, but they'll stand up and change it.
Yeah, they try to change the future.
Spirit.
No, for sure. The spirit is of fighters, and spirit is of free people who always find. And partially, I mean, I'm not Cossack, but I definitely feel this in my own spirit, right? I mean, regardless of lifestyle and education which you have, but you feel it in your genes. I always was standing up to fight for my rights or for somebody else's rights.
Yes. I mean, all right, one more. Let's see, long-term, there's two more. I'll go to masculinity and femininity, because you spoke about the role of women. That's not the same as a country who is masculine, stands up for and has like an aggressive, assertive, tough, focused, they're into material success. Whereas femininity stands for social gender roles overlap. Both the men and women are modest, tender, concerned with quality of life instead of earning money or being the best. So the studies show that Ukraine is very much a feminine society, a softer society.
It is. Yeah, it's true. If we compare Ukrainians with Russians or German, I would consider Russians and German to be definitely masculine, and in Ukraine, definitely it's much more feminine. first, women are much more active, and women would normally care about quality of life, right? Not that much money per se, but rather whether kids are happy, whether home is warm and cozy, and family has food and so on. So we are definitely much more feminine character.
What about outside the family, like in the workplace? Are genders seen as equal?
It's growing more. Again, in the top managerial roles, you would not find that many women, but it's changing. More and more women are now become, in the top management positions. But in the middle level and lower level management, women are dominant.
Do you ever see
in banks, in law firms, in schools, in universities, you name it. In
they
factories.
Can be director. They can be top tier.
I mean, of course, and they in many cases are directors. I mean, in a bank, or in prime minister, sometimes there is a tendency to have men, but even in Ukraine we had Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko, right, was Prime Minister, woman, and we have now lots of ministers who are women, and vice prime ministers and deputy speakers of parliament are all women.
Do you ever see a family where the woman is the breadwinner and the man takes care of the children?
A lot.
Yeah.
It's actually becoming, well, I wouldn't say it becomes popular. I guess it's by default happens, right? But lots of women are very successful in business, either as a career or have their own businesses. And so, you do have men, if not babysitting, but at least, either staying at home or, having a more role of, grocery shopping and taking care of kids, yeah.
That's good. The next one's long-term versus short-term orientation. Ukraine is a pragmatic culture. In studies, it says the truth depends on the situation and the context. Adaptability, propensity to save money, to invest money, thriftiness, perseverance. These are things that they're thinking of not just this week, but long-term. Do you see that as a quality in your
Yeah, for sure,
experience?
because it's connected also to the previous question, because Ukrainians prefer to have certainty, right? So when they have, to have certainty, you need to invest, right, in your future. And invest, it's either build a good house, right, or save money, or plan your future by doing certain pragmatic steps. I find Ukrainians much more pragmatic than, again, other nations, but it also comes from history, because Ukraine has had so many conflicts which it had to live through and survive through and then rebuild, right? So you have to plan, you have to save, you have to be prepared. And I do find that, again, even if you go through Ukrainian villages, for example, everybody pays attention, because if you go through Russian villages, you have lots of houses and lots of land lots, which are really kind of, devastated, if I would say. Yeah? And Ukrainians, even the poorest people, because they're very hardworking and because they're so focused on quality, they would use all their last resources and energy to make sure the house looks nice, that they have at least some chickens, some pigs, some cows, because that's what brings you safety, because you have food, right? And maybe even extra income. And then, okay, you do not have a full-time job, then you go and grow potatoes, because for winter you have to have food. And if you don't grow your own potatoes, then your family income may not be sufficient to buy it, right? So Ukrainians are, thinking a step ahead, and then Ukrainians, of course, are doing something for them. But again, not everybody has money to save, but everybody would work to have a garden, right? At least this is the way you save some money, because you don't go to restaurants, but you grow your own food, and you stock your food for winter, or you can sell it and then get extra income.
Maybe this is a good time to ask you a little about the banking industry, because that's some place where, investments, mortgages, that didn't exist prior to 31 years ago as much. And so now, what do people get to do as far as investing and for the long term?
Well, now, of course, we have all the financial services as you have here in the United States. So lots of younger families, of course, have mortgages and have
401ks? we have?
No, we don't have 401ks. We have lots of other mortgages.
Okay.
I mean, just the regular. I mean, 401k is just, you mean, it's a
Retirement.
pension plan.
Yes.
Ukraine has its own pension type of plan. So we have both public pension, where every corporation, whether public or private, they have to allocate and pay a certain amount of money for so-called social pensions. So it's 401k type of thing, but it's like minimum pension you get. And then you can have also your corporate plan. And for corporate plan, you can also invest additional through your corporate plan, or just have your private pension, which is Pillar 3. Here you don't, well, actually you have some form of Pillar 3, but you have Pillar 2. Oops, just a moment.
My notes are flying.
Yeah.
And we're outside, obviously. Thank you.
So lots of people, of course, they have savings in the banks. So some people actually buy real estate for investment. Many people have been buying land. So like even my relatives, right? They have lots of land plots because they're hoping that they will grow in value, and then at some point of time, if necessary, they sell.
Yeah.
Real estate was the most popular.
Yeah.
And then, of course, pension plans is becoming more popular because Ukraine has been doing pension reform and encouraging people to save. Lots
And
of people
before, everything
investing
was
in government bonds.
Communist and communal. Now you can buy your own apartment, and that is an investment in your future that nobody can take from you. So that's
of
a
course,
good change.
most of it is private.
Yeah.
Well, in the Soviet Union, they were just not possible to buy anything. It was just not for sale.
Right.
So even if people would have money, I mean, they would not have.
You could
place
lose your
to invest.
apartment like that, I guess. If you were,
Sorry.
you could lose your apartment
you
easily
could
if
not
you
lose
lost your job
apartment.
and your.
No, it was not that way. It was so in Soviet Union, and the saying was, because it was socialism, right? From an input from everybody and the outcome for everybody. So it was like a slogan for the communism. So you give something, you get something, right? So that was the society. So if you, for example, of course, in Soviet Union, most of the factories were state-owned, right? So if you work for that factory, for example, for 10 years, then you can get one-room apartment. If you work for a factory for 20 years, then you can get a two-room apartment, right? You get for free, but then you have to be loyal to that factory and you have to work XYZ number of years. And if you worked in that factory and you retire, and you have your two-room or three-room apartment, nobody will take it away from you.
What if
No.
you were terrible at your job and you didn't show up and you lost your job?
So if you didn't work, then come on, you don't get your apartment,
They
right?
take it away. So,
No, they will not take it away.
No.
No, if you already deserved it for your work, you already have
Okay.
delivered, then nobody will take it away.
So in essence, you owned it,
Yes.
even though you didn't own
No, it
on
was kind of
paper.
in practice you owned it. It was
But
not
not-
privatized, but you had the title to it.
Okay.
So as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed and as soon as the privatization program was launched, all the people who lived in those apartments actually immediately privatized them.
Okay.
But nobody could take, unless maybe you are arrested for fraud or for money embezzlement or for committing some very, very big crime. Then maybe as part of confiscation, if the court would decide, then
Yeah.
maybe in that case. But even in this case, if you had family and children, they would normally not take it away,
That's good.
because that's what you deserved by working for XYZ number of years in that factory.
You earned it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the last dimension in the culture is indulgence. So it's the extent to which people try to control their desires or impulses. Speaking of children, this trait is passed down from parent to child. You can imagine if someone wants to teach their child self-control, and to what extent we value that in our society. How much do you see the importance of leisure, the importance of having friends, freedom of speech? That's very important in Ukrainian culture, right? Or no?
Less than in United States. I mean, again, indulgence, yes. Self-control, yes. Having moral compass and making sure you behave as appropriate in the society, yes.
Okay.
Even
moral
though not
discipline.
many people would obviously speak about the Christian values and religious beliefs, but still, there's certain traditions in the society that you cannot really behave in a different way, because you then, you will catch an eye by acting unusually, right? So society does have certain stereotypes of behavior and certain expectations from an adult, for example, right?
Yeah.
And again, self-control, endurance, huge stamina, not complaining about life is something which we are, raised
Value.
from a childhood, and we expect the same from our children. Now, of course, I mean, in Soviet Union there was not much entertainment except for theaters, ballet, symphony, and so on. Now you have all the bars, concerts, anything you like, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, of course, people try to entertain more if they can afford, because we again have still lots of people with fairly low income, right? So many families still cannot afford to go to restaurants, to go to bars, concerts, and so on. But those who can afford, then they invest a lot in traveling, spending time outside, and so on. Definitely, society became to travel much more. In the Soviet Union, it was impossible to travel, and now I think at least every third Ukrainian have traveled somewhere,
Right.
which I think much more than every American or every
Yeah.
third American.
For sure. And we discussed the issue of trust and how, trust in foreigners is, you said Ukraine is very trusting of foreigners now. They're okay with doing business together.
Yeah.
You don't have to prove that you are trustworthy. It's assumed that you will do what you say you're going to do, normally.
I mean, normally, yes. I mean, there is definitely no stigma against foreigners, and there is never suspicion that somebody is going to defraud you, right?
Right.
But of course, I mean, being pragmatic, you always still have to check, because, there's always people of different characters, right?
Right.
So there's still lots of fraud, and still things happen, but equally, not only among foreigners, but among Ukrainians too.
Yeah.
So you just need to apply your general wisdom
You trust one
when
another.
finding a business deal with anyone, right? But we definitely don't have any suspicions or again stigma or stereotype about any foreigner.
And you trust one another when you meet in a business sense. You're not suspicious of someone else about whether they.
No, unless somebody already has a history, then yes, you can be suspicious. But if it is just a normal person, I guess sometimes even Ukrainians not always have experience, right? So, and depends, of course. Sometimes people do act naive from our side, and they trust people probably excessively, right?
Yeah.
Because whenever you do a business deal, you do need to have some minimum check, right?
Is it important to get to know a person before you do a business deal? Like you go out, you have shots, you go play golf, you do something to socially?
Well, if I were to do business, I would definitely check a person and make sure that the person is a decent one. But whether everybody does it in Ukraine, I don't know.
Yeah. So, but
Again, there are lots of inexperienced people who try to do business, because Ukraine is a relatively young country and entrepreneurial spirit is also new, right? So some people get, mistakes, right?
yes.
But it comes with experience. But again, I think in character of Ukrainians is really to be friendly, trustworthy, trust other people. It's just part of the culture.
If you meet somebody and you want to do a business deal, is it important that you go out to dinner or that you go play golf or that you do something like to
Not
build
golf,
that
because
friendship?
I don't think we have that many golf fields in Ukraine.
No.
But go for dinner for sure.
Sure.
Meet family, invite people for family.
Do vodka shots?
Whatever. I mean, whatever is culture. Do vodka shot or play football, depending on what you can tolerate. I have friends who take them to a yacht club and just go on the sea, or sometimes go fishing. Depends on what you like. Ukrainians would normally ask, what do you like? So if a guest comes, whether it is just a friend or future business partner, they would normally ask, what are the hobbies, what this person likes,
Yeah.
and
To
try
try
to
to build
accommodate.
Some rapport, some
Just
friendship.
first to make a person comfortable, make sure that person likes the country, likes people, he is planning to deal with, right? And then it also builds friendship, right?
Yes.
Because it's better to start from what the person likes. Let's
Yes.
develop relationship.
Thank you. This is my friend Angela. We developed our friendship over ballet and theater tickets and watching American films and cooking together with your mom.
How many years ago?
30.
30 years ago?
Yeah, 30 years ago. Hi. Hi, Professor Santiago.